Welcome back to Media Mac. It's week 6. Dr. Shermak here. So glad you can join us. We are cruising through the semester. Hard to believe it's week 6, but here we are. And with this 15-week course, our midterm lands a little bit differently. So if you're at Cuesta and you're in an 18-week course, you're probably preparing, or maybe you've already done your midterms. We're not quite there yet because we're a 15-week course, but I'll talk a little bit at the end about where we're going and how our schedule looks in that regard, because I know a lot of students get concerned about midterms, and we do have a midterm. And we'll address that a little bit later. But first things first, spring break is 1 week away. I'm talking to you here in week 6. There will not be a podcast for week 7 because week 7 is spring break. So this is the last time I'll be talking to you and releasing a podcast until probably March 29th. So you get a little bit of a break. And again, we'll go over the calendar a little bit at the end, and you'll see that on Canvas as well. First things first, this week is all about music. And I always look forward to this week. I was thinking about it this morning as I was prepping my material. I think I come on here every week and say, this is my favorite week. Right? Or I come on and say, oh, I can't wait to get to this one, or this one's really personal. I feel like I say that every week, so I got to be a little bit careful. I always tell people this is my favorite class to teach, just because there is so much good content, and it's so helpful for those of you who are thinking about entering the field of journalism or mass communications, or those of you, which pretty much applies to every one of us, who are consumers of journalism and mass communication. There's just so much relevance here with this class, and we talk a lot about things that influence our lives directly. And this week is certainly one of those in discussing music. So I want you to ponder a question as you're listening before we go any further. Think about the first piece of music you ever owned. And I'm going to use the word piece very intentionally, because a piece of music to me is, a physical piece of music. So, it could be a cassette tape, it could be a CD, an album. It could also be a concert ticket, right? Or maybe a poster of your favorite band or artist. Think about what that first piece of music was that you owned. As you do that, and once you do that, I want you to transition and think about the last piece of music that you actually purchased, all right? The most recent. For me, I know, growing up, we had a lot of records. We had a Fisher-Price record player when I was a kid, and my dad had a really extensive vinyl collection, and he still does, and still has those vinyls. So I think, he bought us this record player as kids so we could listen to music too. And we didn't have like the kid version of like a Pat Benatar song. We had like the actual Pat Benatar song, right? They didn't make a kid version back then. And so we were listening to albums on our Fisher-Price record player. But the first piece of music that I remember owning very clearly was a CD. And I think this was about 1989 or so in my life. So I was about 10 years old. And I got a CD called Home Base. And that was an album from DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince. Now, you folks probably know the Fresh Prince much better as Will Smith these days. But I got that CD, and I also remember that there was a parental advisory on it. And I'm not quite sure if my mom just ignored that or knew what it was, but it was. And probably the most famous song on that album is Summertime. I will not sing it for you because I don't want to lose listeners. But there's also a kind of a cult hit on there, called You Saw My Blinker, which is a really stupid song, but it's funny. Anyway, that was the first thing I had, and I just remember like looking through the album notes, like the cover, I can still see the image of that album cover in my head, looking at the lyrics, reading the lyrics, popping the CD out of that plastic case. It was mine. I held it in my hands, right? And so when you fast forward and you think about the music that you own today, the pieces of music that you own today, my guess is a lot of you, for this second question about what is the most recent piece of music you open, you probably thought, I don't really remember, or I don't know. Some of you might be, music junkies, and maybe you have a great vinyl collection, so you can probably point really quickly to a vinyl album. But for me, my last purchase of music was my streaming subscription, right? It was my streaming subscription. That's what I pay for, and I get so much for that, for the money. But that's what I own. So there's a gap between the two answers, first piece of music, last piece of music. And that really tells the entire story of this week and this chapter. And that's what we're unpacking today on the podcast and also this week. If you think about all the mediums we have covered so far this semester, all right, newspapers, books, magazines, radios, none of them are like music because none of them have the universal emotional grip that music does. Music is near universally loved. I can't think of a person I've ever met if I asked them, what do you listen to, or what's your favorite band, or what music do you listen to? I can't think of a person I've met who have said, I don't listen to music. Can you? I can't. And I'll be really honest. I think if I met a person who said, I don't listen to music, I'd be like, we'll see you later. All right. I don't know if I want to go near them. That kind of concerns me. Music cuts across age, right? It cuts across cultures. It teaches us cultures. It cuts across languages. There's probably songs out there that you love that aren't even in your native language. Nothing else does that. Furthermore, with music, loyal consumers of music are very open to repetition, while at the same time being open to discovery. You can listen to the same song hundreds of times and still enjoy it anew every time, but then turn around and still go looking for something new. That's very different. You're not going to read a newspaper article hundreds of times. You might read a book repeatedly, but music is very unique in that sense. And what is changing now about music that is true in this age of a less significant gatekeeper is that the masses can now not only produce music, they can consume it and they can curate it. They can do all three. It used to just be where they consume the music, but now they can also produce and curate the music, and they can do that all at once. The barriers to entry in this particular medium are gone. And if you want to get really businessy about it, I invent words all the time. Businessy is one. Music is kind of a product, right? If we look at it strictly in that sense. I don't like looking at it that way because that feels kind of icky because I love music so much. But music is a product in the sense that it is consistently consumed and there's brand loyalty built in, whether that loyalty is to a genre or a band or an artist. In many ways, it reminds me of fries, French fries. I'm serious. And like Coca-Cola. We could have a great French fry debate. I do like having that debate. For my money and my taste, I'm a McDonald's French fry guy. I really am. You might think that's mid. That's fine. But the thing about McDonald's fries is whether I get them in Paso Robles, California, or Chattanooga, or Washington, D.C., or Vermont, I know what I'm getting. They're going to taste consistently the same. And I love them. And I built a relationship with them. Yes, fries. Music is the same way. It's consistent. We have a relationship with it. We're used to it in a good way. And that makes it unlike anything we study in this class. As always, your chapter is going to touch a lot on history, but I want to use a little bit of historical context to guide us through and lead us to some of the core discussion we're going to have today. Let's go back to 1877. This dude named Thomas Edison, you've probably heard of him. He invents the phonograph, all right? The phonograph is a really, really huge development, obviously, in music. It's the first time music can be recorded, but a lot of people don't realize with the phonograph, at that time, you can only listen to it once. The cylinder would degrade, and then you could no longer listen to the album. Can you imagine that? Hey, Dad's got a new album. Okay, everyone listen in, because this is it. One time, right? So it allowed you, because most music at that time was just live. If you're going to hear music, it was going to be literally someone performing for you. This is 1877. There's no music industry yet. So you could capture a live performance, but you could not repeat it. And it takes several decades until we get to a point where repetition enters the music model. 1938, the LP record. LP means long playing. Had about 30 minutes on each side, and you could play that over and over. This is the birth of the repetition model. That same model I was just talking about a moment ago, born in 1938 with the LP. Repetition is how music kind of works on people. It's how it gets to their minds and sticks in their minds. You've probably had the experience where maybe your artist, releases an album and you hear that song for the first time and you're kind of like, eh. And then a year later, it's like your top listened to song on your streaming service. Or worse yet, you go to a concert and they come out and they play like one of their banger hits and you're just like, oh, this is awesome. And then they come out and they're like, okay, now we're going to do some of our new stuff. Oh. But then you end up liking that too. It's because you need to listen to it more. Repetition, when we have recordings, changes music. That underscores the next development. Fast forward to 1963, the cassette tape. So now not only can we record and listen to it again and again, we also go portable. Sony releases the portable radio, I think in 57 or 58, if memory serves me correct, somewhere in there. Cassette tape comes around in 1963. They combine those technologies and they create the Walkman. All right, the Sony Walkman. Sony Walkman sold 200 million tape players before it was discontinued in 2010. 200 million tape players. I think I had every iteration of the Walkman. I had the tape Walkman. I had the CD Walkman. But we're talking tape players. So cassette tapes were huge because they were light, they were portable, allowed you to replay music. And there's, of course, those kind of nostalgic moments. I mean, I remember cassette tapes really well, especially recording songs off the radio. When you would try to, hear your favorite song come on, you could hit the two buttons and record it. Did that a lot. I remember making a bunch of mixtapes and getting mixtapes from my friends. That was like a big deal, And we have that same kind of effect if you make a playlist for someone. But getting a physical copy in your hand that someone made for you was really cool. Very meaningful. But what the cassette tape did, it really was the first time that, yes, it was portable and yes, it was repeatable, but it was also the first time that people could curate and share music themselves. That's when that era was born. We're doing the same thing today, just digitally, more efficiently, faster, probably with more precision. Let's go 20 years later, 1983. Big development. I'm alive. That's great. This is the compact disc. Okay. CDs enter the fray. And this is something that's really important. I think that gets forgotten. CDs actually have better sound quality than streaming. There's data out there to support this. And if you listen closely, you can hear it. But we kind of forget about it just because of the ease that streaming gives us. The first CD player in 1983 cost about $1,500. Typical model in technology. I'm sure I'll mention this when we get to television, but my dad had a very early model VCR, and he paid $600 for it. Yeah. And that's what happens. New technology is expensive at first. It's then able to be made cheaper. That's how it reaches the masses. Those things come down in price. So CDs are born in 1983, and they become the norm for music. I mentioned my DJ Jazzy Jeff and Fresh Prince CD that I got around 1989. CDs peaked in 2001. Peaked. And then started to decline. And the reason they did that is because of something that happened around 1999 that changed the music industry forever. All right? I'm going to talk about that in much more detail in segment 2. But for now, let's take a quick break. You're listening to Media Mac. Dr. Shermak here. We're talking music. We will be right back.
Stay connected to your campus. The Questonian has been Cuesta College's trusted news source since 1966. From breaking news to campus life, we cover the stories that matter to you. Follow us at The Questonian on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, or visit questonian.com.
Welcome back to Media Mac. Dr. Shermak here. It's week 6. We are talking about music. I absolutely love this topic. So much that I've experienced in my life. I'm 46 years old, so I've seen a lot of different versions of the music industry over the years. And this is so fun to talk about. And there's some personal stories that I'm going to share with purpose, okay? I'm not here to just share old nostalgic stories with you. I share them with purpose. And right before the break, we were coming up on about 1999. We were talking about how CDs were the primary way people listened to music, the primary way they bought music. And they really peaked in 2001. But let's go to 1999. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a personal anecdote to to illustrate what changed in the music industry. So in 1999, I arrived at Indiana University, and I was staying in a dorm called McNutt. Good name for a dorm, I suppose. And McNutt was cool because I had a single room, and I was on a floor with a bunch of other transfer students because I started at a community college, went to Indiana from a community college. So I was there with other folks who transferred in. It was a really cool situation. But the coolest thing about my dorm is that we had broadband internet. Yeah, broadband internet. Now, that might sound silly to you today, but in those days, most internet was still dial-up, 1999. So if I wanted to get online at home, I had to make sure my brothers weren't needing to use the phone, or my parents weren't needing to use the phone, or were on the phone. But now I was online all the time. Now today that's the norm. Back then it wasn't. So I had my computer set up in my dorm room, and one night, his name was Josh. He was our RA, and he came down, knocked on the door, just wanted to say hi and chat, and he came in. And he said, "Have you heard about this new Napster thing?" I said, "No." And so we downloaded on my computer Napster. And if you don't know what Napster is, how do I say it? Napster is, or was, what they called a music sharing site. All right. And so on that night when I first downloaded Napster, it was this interface. And then I could download an MP3 player on my computer. It was called Winamp. I remember that. And you would go in and you would search Napster for songs, and it would go onto the server and it would find these MP3 files. So if I went in and I typed in, I was listening to like a lot of Dave Matthews Band back then. I still listen to Dave Matthews Band, but I type in Dave Matthews, get a bunch of results from that. And so Josh and I were sitting there and we were talking about music, one of my favorite topics, talking about what music we like to listen to, searching for it, playing it on Napster. And I was like, ooh, I like this song. Boom, download. He would say another song. Boom, download. Next thing I knew, I had this list literally of hundreds of songs. I was up that night until like 4 a.m. downloading songs. Now, I love music. And I was getting kind of tired at that point in my life paying $15 for a CD that, I'd try to buy albums I'd listen to straight through, but sometimes you buy them and there's 2 good songs and then a bunch of duds. I was discovering new music. I was listening to B-sides and rarities. I still have a bunch of the rarities and B-sides I downloaded from the Beastie Boys. I was discovering music without paying so much for it. I've never experienced anything like that before. It was amazing. You could find any song from any artist, any era, and someone had it there and they were sharing it, right? So it kind of felt like this miracle almost. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but it felt sort of like this miracle. But at the same time, I knew in the back of my head, I really did, that is this stealing a little bit? Like, yeah, it kind of is, right? And it turned out both of those things were true, right? It was really interesting. At one point on campus at IU, and this made national news, they actually shut down our broadband. The university did because so many people were using it for Napster. They eventually put it back up after we as students went crazy, right? And they eventually put it back up. Napster launches in 1999. It's built by college students, and it has this very much for the people attitude with it. 80 million users at its peak in 2000. That's when the record industry takes notice. And they sued the hell out of them, all right? So much so that Napster went from 80 million users in 2000 to bankrupt and shut down by 2002. So Napster is gone, but what Napster did change the music industry, I think, forever. They didn't create this desire to have access to any, instant access to any music, right? We had that already. And once that genie was kind of out of the bottle, that people would come for instant music in droves, there's no way that was going back. And the industry took notice and said, look, we're going to sue this thing off the face of the earth, but we can't ignore the message that our listeners are sending. That same year, in 2001, when CDs peaked and the Napster was kind of fading away, something amazing happens. Apple releases the iPod. And this is absolutely no coincidence. You have millions of people with millions of hours of music downloaded, and they need a place for it to go, right? They need a place for it to go, and this is the first device for direct download of music. Now, of course, when they release the iPod, they also have iTunes where you can purchase music, but most people, myself included, were putting their downloaded music on the iPod. And to me, the iPod was just the coolest thing. That scroll wheel, everything being digital. I wasn't fast forwarding on a tape. I wasn't skipping tracks on a CD. The control, the way it fit in your pocket, just amazing. It's one of the coolest things I think I've ever owned. We talked last week about the transistor radio being the first electronic medium you could put in your pocket, right? Very important. And it didn't just save radio, it created, I don't know if I want to say it saved radio. It expanded radio. It created a whole new relationship between media, and your daily life. So iPod, I think, is another chapter in this story where the music follows you, right? You take it with you. Just this week, I read an interesting story on a website called Digital Music News. Apple discontinued the iPod in 2022, so it's been gone for 4 years now. And in 2025, Digital Music News reported that eBay searches for iPods went up 25% in 2025. The belief is that younger listeners are looking for them because they want a device that only does one thing: to avoid the notifications, their social feed, the news. I wish you wouldn't avoid news, but I get it. They just want the music. So there's some call right now actually for Apple to bring the iPod back. Vinyl came back, cassettes came back. It's interesting, right? Throwback to the old technology. It's something worth watching. As we move forward with the iPod, we get into what's known as the streaming era. And some of the names you're more familiar with streaming weren't some of the first ones. The first streaming service that I used was Pandora. That launched in 2005. You had SoundCloud in 2007, and then Spotify in 2008. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about Spotify. These were 3 different models that got here at almost the same time. Pandora was doing this incredible thing by personalizing music through an algorithm, something called the Music Genome Project. Every song was mapped out with all these different musical attributes, and the songs you liked created an algorithm, and then Pandora found songs that fit that algorithm of what you liked. I discovered a lot of really great music through there that I still listen to today. SoundCloud is kind of the ultimate music product democratized. Anyone can upload, anyone can be heard. That's where that big circle of audience is that big circle of producer is equal to that big circle of audience. And then you coach to have Spotify. They really started the freemium model where music was free with ads, or if you wanted them gone, you could pay. So if you look at, some of the revenue on a chart, you're going to see that physical music collapses, digital takes a dip, and then streaming takes over the industry. Streaming brought the money back to music after Napster exposed it. But it brought it back very differently. And we're going to get into that much more as we move forward. Let's talk a little bit about one of the major players in that change, and that is Spotify. So the most recent data I have, late 2025, Spotify has 713 million monthly active users, 281 million premium subscribers. That means 40% of their users pay. That is an insane conversion rate. You never see that with a freemium product. 40%. 281 million people pay for that product. That's Indonesia. If premium Spotify customers started their own country, it'd be the 4th largest country in the world, population-wise. Can you imagine that? Imagine you create a product and 281 million people buy it. It's crazy. Spotify has over 100 million songs, 7 million podcasts. And the model is interesting. It's really about where you get placed. If you get placed on the Today's Top Hits playlist, that equates to 20 million additional streams for your artists. That is real life-altering revenue. You get put on the New Music Fridays playlist. That's 14 million more streams. The curation that's happening on Spotify is gatekeeping. We talked last week with radio about how, the program director or the DJ was kind of the decision maker there, the gatekeeper. We talked about how with Clear Channel and what became iHeart came in and they gutted local radio stations and replaced them with this sort of formulaic playlist. That's kind of what Spotify is doing now. Is it any different? Is an algorithm better than what those companies did? I'm just setting that there. All right. We're not going to have that debate right now, but it's something to think about. One of the most innovative elements of Spotify is Spotify Wrapped. It's a brilliant use of data. They take your data and turn it into a marketing campaign that you run for them, right? Because you're out there and you're sharing your content. Look at my playlist. When on the other side of it, it's look at all this Spotify content. 60 million users engaged with the most recent Spotify Wrap. Content was shared 40 million times. It is a masterclass in using your own data to grow your own platform. It's really incredible. Spotify has been in the news a lot in recent years and even in recent months because they've put in so much money into the podcast industry. Most recent data suggests that Spotify has added 10 billion with a B, into the podcast industry. Just recently, not too far down the road, Spotify has opened something called Sycamore Studios. And it's a video-first podcast production facility in Hollywood. 11,000 square feet, 5 studio areas, multi-camera setups. Why? Because they see the growth opportunity in video podcasts. In fact, last October, they struck a deal with Netflix to bring in podcasts from The Ringer. You might be familiar with The Ringer, Bill Simmons, The Rewatchables, there's others there. They're going to bring them to Netflix and even pulling these off of YouTube entirely. So if you want to watch video podcast versions of this, they're no longer on YouTube. They'll be exclusively on Netflix. So think about that. These two massive media companies, Spotify and Netflix, are investing this much in video podcasting. Podcasts are real. The Golden Globes just handed out Best Podcast Award. It's kind of a cultural moment, right? So this sort of line between a late night talk show and a podcast and a Netflix series really is kind of dissolving. And there's all these kind of content sharing over these different mediums that we'll be discussing, one of them being television. So keep an eye on the podcast because the podcast industry certainly has an influence on the music industry. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about Spotify. And then for our third and final segment, as we usually do each week, we're going to look into the future and talk about what is next for music when we come back. This is Media Mac. I'm Dr. Shermak. Hang in there. We'll be right back.
Want real journalism experience? Join the Questonian. Build your portfolio, develop professional skills, and tell the stories that matter to our campus. Enroll in JOUR 202 or 203 for 4 credits. Questions? Email thequestonian@questa.edu. The Questonian, your story starts here.
Welcome back to segment 3. Dr. Shermak here. You're listening to Media Mac. It's week 6. We're talking music. We've covered a lot of ground today. Edison's phonograph, cassette tapes, DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince, Napster, Spotify, Netflix, a whole bunch of stuff. I want to close out with a couple more things about Spotify that I think are really important to discuss, and then we're going to take a look into the future. So, Spotify has been, and I think personally rightly so, criticized for some recent activities. And I want to address those today because I think it's really important anytime we talk about media to look at it critically, right? And I'll say first off, I think Spotify is an amazing product. I think what they've done has been incredible. It's revolutionized the way that we listen to music. It's revolutionized the way that I personally listen to music, all right? But there's always been some issue, and there still is to some extent, with money, with paying artists, because I firmly believe in making sure that the content creators, the producers of this content that we love, get paid what they deserve. And one of the real criticisms of Spotify over the years is that they just aren't paying out all that much. Just in January of this year, Spotify announced that it paid more than $11 billion to the music industry in 2025. $11 billion. Spotify said, this is their words, it was the largest annual payment from any single retailer in music history. That's a 10% increase from 2024, and they said that total lifetime payouts for artists have reached 70 billion. Yes, 70 billion. So I want to make sure I had my note right there. And half of that went to independent artists and labels, not just the major labels, because they're still out there. They said that let me get this number right. More than 13,800 artists earned at least $100,000 from Spotify in 2025. They called it their loud and clear report. And they claim that more artists hitting that threshold than were earning half of that at the height of the CD era. So on the surface, this sounds like an improvement. If we take Spotify at their word, and you hope that they have a lot of investors holding them accountable, that's good news. All right, revenue is being sent to those who deserve it, the creators, and there's more. There has been some pushback on that $11 billion headline. I read a story on the website called What Hi-Fi, kind of a music news bloggy website. They talked about this band. It's a Welsh indie band called Los Campesinos. Doesn't sound Welsh. But anyway, they published their actual Spotify earnings at the end of 2025. And they said that Spotify paid them less than a half cent per stream. Comes out to 0.0037 cents. And that was less than every other major streaming service where they had their content posted. It says here the band's own analysis showed that if their listeners had used something like Tidal, or not something like Tidal, which is another streaming, they would have doubled their streaming income on a single album. There's some people out there that are saying streaming services are obsolete. I disagree with that. I think the numbers say that otherwise. It's interesting because Spotify, they only turned their first profit in 2024. They've been around for almost 20 years. First profit in 2024 because they claim they spend 70% of their revenue on royalties and they run a very thin margin. So this piece in What Hi-Fi, Spotify responded to it, and I think it's interesting. Let me read this. They said, per stream rate comparisons are misleading because payouts come from a revenue pool, not a fixed rate per play. So basically, a smaller service that has fewer streams looks like it pays more per play, but they're actually putting less money in artists' pockets. I hope that makes sense. So it's not wrong. Mathematically, it makes sense. It's a very carefully constructed frame from them, but it makes sense. And I think both things can be true at the same time. Here's the fact, though. Spotify is the biggest engine of music revenue growth in the world right now. If you want to make money from music, and I'm guessing you do, if you're producing it, you need to be on Spotify. And even if you are getting paid, it might not cover your rent. Another challenge of being a musician. This is how the model works. Understand it and then debate it. Speaking of debates, I do want to address something about Spotify because this podcast, as you know, is distributed on Spotify. And I want you to understand this context that I'm discussing. So in the fall of last year, Spotify was running recruitment ads for ICE. And this was part of a broad push by the Trump administration and their push to hire over 10,000 deportation officers. It was very controversial because the ads used language that described people as dangerous illegals and told Americans they should join in order to, quote, fulfill their mission, end quote. That's all directly from the ad copy. Spotify initially defended running these pieces and said they didn't violate their advertising policies. There's a huge article about this in Rolling Stone, by the way, if you're interested. These same ads also ran on Max, on Hulu, on YouTube, Pandora, Prime, cable television. This really was a broad government advertising buy across every major platform. And why wouldn't they go to Spotify? Huge numbers, huge reach. Rolling Stone reported, using data from the research firm Equus, that DHS paid Spotify $74,000 for the campaign. It's interesting because it's less than 3% of what they paid Google and YouTube. Those companies each received about $3 million. So this is the tough moment for media. When you have a government coming to you, willing to pay money, and sending a message on it that might be very controversial. And I really want to point out how abnormal this is. And how abnormal it is to have an ad laden with such disparaging language, like dangerous illegals. That is not the norm. And if I may step on my soapbox for a moment, that should not be considered the norm. Artists pulled their catalogs from Spotify. Advocacy groups organized boycott campaigns. In New York City, their comptroller formally denounced this move? According to Variety, according to a Variety report published in January of 2026, the ad stopped running on Spotify in late 2025. Spotify said the government contract had ended, and they did not announce any changes to their advertising policy. So this becomes a larger journalism and mass communications issue, right? Because it has impact and influence really across all media. When you have a freemium model, it means that those free users are being sold to advertisers. That's the transaction. Nothing's free, right? I mean, that's where we're at. Platforms generally don't editorialize the ad content the way like a newspaper editor does. So particularly on a streaming service, for example, with the Questonian at Questa, our student newspaper, we have a policy: we do not take political ads. Because the belief is that if that political ad is running alongside a story about that same topic, that's going to be very confusing to our audience. Spotify is not a newspaper. It's very different. So I think thinking about the nuance and the differences across media is kind of our entire purpose here of why we study this. So I guess where I stand on it is that I understand why Spotify ran the ads. It's money. Okay? Like, it's money. But I also can have my personal feelings about it as well. And one of the best ways you can speak up against things you disagree with is by leading with your wallet. So those of you who feel that way and don't want to engage on Spotify, that's why I'm giving you options to consume this podcast, because it is a required part of the course. The fact is, most people have Spotify. All right, so I put the podcast on Spotify for reach. I put the podcast on Apple Podcasts if you want an alternative. And I also put it on YouTube. I want you to be able to have a choice. And that kind of gives you a full picture why that is. So if you ever have any questions on this or you want to reach out to me directly, please do. I just believe in choice. All right. And for you to consume things the way you want. And if you choose to avoid a certain, platform, you can do that. And I'm open to suggestions. Okay. So please feel free. There will be a midterm survey coming after spring break where you can provide me feedback. And I'd love to hear that. Okay, so let's get back to more about music. Let's look ahead. All right, let's look ahead. I'm going to talk about a gentleman. So my good friend Troy Swanson, who's a research librarian back at Moraine Valley Community College near Chicago, where I spent 8 years teaching writing and journalism. Troy introduced me to a guy named Jacques Attali, and he's a French writer and a futurist. He made a prediction in the 1970s, all right, 1970s, that I think is really worth knowing. He said that eventually the age of plenitude for music would come, but it would need two conditions. The first condition is that media players become cheap enough to be owned by the masses. We've been talking about that for much of this podcast. Think about iPods. Think about now your phone is a media player. Everyone has one. And then he also said that music needs to become accessible on demand at a low cost. I come from a generation that was spending $15 to $18 a pop on CDs. Spending $17 on a Spotify account, a premium Spotify account per month, feels like nothing to me. Atali was correct about this age of plenitude by about 30 years. By the way, if you're looking for somewhere to invest your money, he talked about he made the same prediction for 3D printers and the manufacturing of physical goods. Interesting. But Atali was getting to, I think, a deeper question that I don't really have an answer to, but I think is worth thinking about, especially in terms of media. What happens to value when everything is available all the time? When you have abundant access, does it take away from the meaning of it? And personally, I think with music, it doesn't. Because I can choose the way I listen to music and apply it to any moment in my life. But then we have to kind of look at the other side of it and think, what does it mean for an artist when their life's work, their passion, is worth less than a half a cent per play? Does that matter? Does that make this age of plenitude a good thing? Things to think about. Jacques Attali. Check it out. Hope I'm saying his name right. I feel confident about the Jacques. Less confident about the Attali. What does music look like going forward? Some of it we're doing right now. Create your own soundtrack. We're literally going to do that in class for this module. Vinyl is actually growing, and I think physical music will always be around, but it's going to be very niche. It's going to be a very intentional interaction with consumers. Record labels have been consolidating forever. Kind of reminds me of the radio consolidation and what we'll eventually talk about with the television consolidation. 3 major labels control most of the industry. But maybe we arrive to a point where you don't need one of those traditional labels. Maybe there'll be Little Caesars Pizza Music or Coca-Cola Records. Because all you really need is funding to get yourself up and running. The equipment, the barrier to entry is pretty low. Just think about this. Whoever controls the platform controls the culture. Same thing for radio, same thing for newspapers. Who gets to make those calls? And then who is held accountable when they get those things wrong? That same idea, that same thought needs to be considered for everything we touch on in this class and this podcast. Who's in control and who is accountable? Something to think about, and think about not only with music, but the other areas we've covered so far and the other areas we will cover. Speaking of looking forward, let's do that right now. Let's talk about what you're doing this week, because I think this is one of the more fun modules. So for our discussion board this week, we're going to create something called the Journalism 200 Mood Mix. All right, this is inspired by the Late Show with Stephen Colbert, who does this and has done this with guests. We're going to build a class playlist. I've always argued that there's a song for every moment, every emotion, event, feeling, and we're really going to put that to the test this week. You only need one post, all right? There's no reply required, but you're certainly welcome to do that. And for each post, you're going to list 8 songs. And I have the categories to think about when you list those songs. So like one of them is a song that's great for singing in the shower, or a song that comforts you, or your favorite song to dance to. And you're going to explain, after you give the song and the artist, you're going to give 2 to 4 sentences about why you picked it. Once these come in, I'm going to make a playlist on Spotify, and I'm going to share it on Canvas. This is one of my favorite activities. I've been doing this for a while, so I have a lot of playlists from students over time, which is super fun. So this post is not due until March 29th. Take note, I'm opening the week 6 module. Today is Sunday the 15th. I'm opening it up for Monday the 16th. And then you will have 2 weeks to complete it. So I really want to give you a true spring break. Spring break runs the 23rd through the 27th. So if you don't want to do any work during spring break, finish it this week like you normally would. If you'd rather take this week off from the class, finish it up over spring break. Choices, right? I love giving choices. So we'll also have chapter 4 to read. Make sure to read that and listen to this before you take the quiz. There'll also be a couple questions in there about current events, and Lord knows there's a lot of events going on right now. Next week, we move into film, movies. After that, we hit TV, and then we have our midterm. So there's a lot of great material coming up and some of the best stuff of this class going forward where we're bringing things together. As I leave you today, I want to wish you a restful, safe spring break. Please take time to enjoy yourself. I never leave class. So if you have questions over spring break, I might be a little delayed, but feel free to reach out. You're not bugging me at all. Thank you so much for listening in here for week 6. Please take care of yourself and those around you. So long, everybody.